Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is, well, it's to unpack a relationship that I think is far more complex and, frankly, way more fascinating than its common reputation might suggest. We're going to explore this curious and deep intersection between music often dismissed as just background noise, the repetitive stuff, the ambient, the so-called elevator music,
right,
and the most intense, intentional, spiritual, and functional healing practices of the last century or so. We're really examining how a certain kind of sonic texture transformed from like a tool for commercial mood management into a technology for self-realization.
And that transformation, that's really the heart of this deep dive, which we're calling Harmonia del Mundo Interiore, the harmonies of the inner world.
Okay.
And to really understand this, we have to go beyond just, genre labels. We are exploring how the fusion of, say, repetitive global rhythms, drone textures, and these ambient soundscapes became a recognized functional tool.
Functional being the key word there.
Absolutely. A tool for deep interior work, for self-healing, and critically for achieving altered states of consciousness, or ASCs. So to map this out, we really need to dive into the cultural context. We're moving from the philosophical blueprints of neo-theosophy right into the physics of vibrational sound therapy.
So our goal here is to really distill what the sources are telling us and understand the true functionality of sound. I mean, how did repetition, ambience, and frequency kind of jump the tracks? How do they go from being these commercial tools designed to manipulate your, fatigue cycle in a grocery store?
Right, keep you shopping longer.
Into genuine functional practices aimed at self-realization and accessing what our sources pretty daringly call other realities.
It's quite a journey. And it reveals that the goals of, say, commercial mood engineering and spiritual harmonization are maybe surprisingly similar in some ways. We've got sources connecting, believe it or not, Victorian occultism, 1960s TV advertising, and modern subtle energy research. So let's unpack this journey. Maybe we should start by establishing that spiritual foundation of functionalism.
Good idea. Let's get into part one.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we approach the New Age, we've got to acknowledge right off the bat, its kind of nebulous nature. Our sources are super clear on this. It is incredibly difficult to pin down.
Yeah, it really is.
It's not like an organized entity with a fixed creed, nor does it have a single founder or some central body. It's probably best understood as, an unstable milieu, or maybe, after the 70s, just a convenient tag or idiom people use for alternative spirituality.
That's a great way to put it. It's, in essence, this collective field of behavior and shared esoteric ideas, but it completely lacks the uncentralized authority or, the dogmatic structure you find in traditional religions. So to truly grasp its genesis, we really have to look backward, back to its esoteric roots, specifically in the early 20th century. That's where the term New Age was given, its initial and pretty potent currency.
And that takes us straight to Alice Bailey, right, in the 1930s U.S. She sounds crucial here, but what exactly was this system of theosophy she was outlining?
Well, Bailey was originally an Anglican who became a theosophist, and her work was just massive. A huge corpus published through the Lucis Trust, detailing a system that's often called eschatological theosophy.
Eschatological, it's so end times.
Sort of, yeah. But this wasn't just abstract philosophy, it was a really strong millennialistic prediction. She prophesied this esoteric New Age that would be, ushered in by the return of Christ.
Okay.
Who would act as the head of this esoteric guiding body, the Great White Brotherhood of Masters. It's quite something. She detailed the whole plan for how humanity would move into the Aquarian Age in texts like Discipleship in the New Age.
Wow. So, in its original context, the New Age wasn't subtle at all. It was meant to be this massive, global, really dramatic change, almost like a second coming, but filtered through this very specific esoteric worldview.
Exactly, but it wasn't the only narrative bubbling up at the time. Yeah. Simultaneously, you had these proto-New Age figures like Sheena Govan in the mid-1950s using the term Children of the New Age, and the pioneering proto-Findhorn group up in Scotland, Peter and Eileen Caddy, Dorothy McLean.
Right, Findhorn.
And these figures, despite having pretty disparate temperaments and backgrounds, they were kind of united by this early non-aligned quest for practical inner spiritual guidance, getting results.
And the fact that these early movements were already pretty diverse and really focused on methodology rather than strict dogma, that kind of points us toward the core dynamic, doesn't it? This shift towards personal functionalism.
Yes.
Why is that functional application just so important to the New Age seeker?
Well, because the entire ethos, especially of post-1960s alternative spirituality, is really centered on the rational, functional application of spiritual skills. You see,
Rational functional.
the seeker isn't really looking for salvation based on blind faith or, historical scripture. They want a spiritual practice that does things. That's the key. It has to produce demonstrable results, whether that means like curing of physical ailments, achieving personal success, or just finding inner peace. It's the ultimate pragmatism applied to the soul.
I see. Okay, that contrasts really sharply with the earlier, almost apocalyptic tone of Bailey you mentioned.
It really does. You contrast that kind of passionate rhetoric of a great cleansing or a second coming with the language that starts to dominate the scene later on. Phrases like turning point and this very psychologistic concept of a new consciousness.
Ah, the new consciousness.
Right. This shift basically moves the goal from some grand global drama led by esoteric masters to something deeply personal and crucially incremental. A series of changes in one's own understanding and attitudes.
So the focus becomes entirely internal.
Wholly internal, yeah. Positioning the individual as this empowered self-acting subject. And in this framework, self-realization and self-healing are, well, they're intrinsically linked. They become almost two sides of the same internal coin.
And this internal focus, it naturally leads to the concept of holism, doesn't it? If the goal is internal harmony, the philosophy kind of has to embrace this idea of wholeness and universal interrelatedness.
Holism is absolutely central. And if everything is interconnected, then the most powerful thing you can possibly change is your own internal state.
Yeah.
Because that is what, according to this worldview, ultimately creates your external reality.
Right.
This underpins that core New Age conviction of creating our own reality.
Okay, but where does this idea actually come from beyond just, philosophical wishful thinking? Is there a basis they point to?
Well, it gained significant traction through sources like the Seth material, channeled texts, and really crucially, the holographic paradigm.
The holographic paradigm. Okay, tell me about that.
This paradigm, it's often associated with figures like the physicist David Bohm and the neuroscientist Carl Pribram. And it essentially provides the, let's say, scientific-sounding justification for this belief system.
Right, the scientific veneer.
Kind of. The theory posits that the universe, or reality as it really is, exists outside of our normal time and space as this primary undivided wholeness, a kind of radical singularity.
Okay, so if that's reality, how does our brain fit into this grand holographic picture?
Well, the theory suggests that our brains are effectively the interpreters. They mathematically construct the hard reality we perceive by decoding and interpreting frequencies from this transcendent dimension.
So the brain is like a receiver and projector.
In a way, Pribram's work suggested the brain actually acts like a hologram itself, interpreting a holographic universe. Now, this is vital for our discussion today because it provides the emic justification, it's the internal belief, the insider view.
Got it.
That if reality is constructed by interpreting frequencies, then sound, and especially repetitive sonic input, become the most direct, potent technologies available for manipulating those frequencies.
Oh, okay, so sound becomes the tool.
The tool for manipulating reality, for accessing these inner worlds, and for achieving those altered states of consciousness we mentioned. The stage is now perfectly set for sound to become functional.
Okay, so if the spiritual world was starting to focus intently on vibration and frequency to transform the inner self, what was the external, the commercial world doing with those exact same concepts? And this is where, for me, it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because the commercial sphere kind of figured out the functional power of repetitive sound long before the spiritual world formalized it for healing, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. We have to begin with the genesis of engineered background music. You trace it back to wired radio, which eventually became the infamous Muzak.
Muzak. Everyone knows Muzak. Or thinks they do.
Right. And its primary intent was purely commercial and, well, regulatory. It was designed to serve workplaces, hospitals, restaurants, using music as a predictable, scientifically tuned mood boost.
Scientifically tuned. How scientific was it really? I think most people today just think of Muzak as, dull strings playing bland versions of songs. But it was rigorously engineered, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Muzak employed this process they called stimulus progression. They actually determined that people experienced a natural human fatigue cycle throughout the workday, with specific energy slumps, usually around 10:30 a.m. and then again around 3 p.m.
The mid-morning and mid-afternoon crash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to counteract this, they programmed their music in these precise 15-minute segments. And within each segment, they would systematically increase the tempo, the volume, and the instrumentation, what they called the stimulus value, to lift the listener's mood and productivity without them even consciously realizing it was happening. It was essentially early corporate biofield modulation using tempo and timbre.
Wow, it almost sounds like a kind of musical caffeine drip, just constantly adjusting you.
That was precisely the intention. And, the concept of music not demanding your full attention goes back even further. Think about Eric Satie, back in the 1920s. His musique de meublement.
Furniture music.
Furniture music, yeah. It was explicitly designed for peripheral listening.
Yeah.
Something just to exist in the background, freeing the listener from what he saw as the self-imposed seriousness of high art music.
And that capacity for peripheral listening, that was just thoroughly exploited by the post-war mood music phenomenon, right? Figures like Jackie Gleason, Morton Gould, they led the charge. The aesthetic of those masked strings is so specific. Why were strings the ideal vehicle for creating mood?
Well, they delivered pure, controlled atmosphere. Gleason's early album, Music for Lovers Only, or later Velvet Brass, they're instructive texts in themselves. He explicitly defined the requirements.
Right.
He said, softness in music is not only a matter of volume, it means that there must be no jarring notes, that the playing must be smooth, controlled, and sophisticated. The sound had to be completely seamless, non-challenging, basically a constant source of agreeable, low-involvement pleasure. It was the perfect auditory blanket.
A blanket, yeah. And this whole phenomenon just exploded in the 1960s, especially with the rise of albums using sound effects and field recordings to kind of enhance the atmosphere. And the sources mention a dichotomy in approach here, highlighting two groups, the 101 Strings and the Mystic Moods Orchestra.
Yes, they really exemplify two quite different paths to creating sonic atmosphere.
Yeah.
The 101 Strings, they sort of took the macrocosm approach. They produced these albums that were deliberately weird and cosmic, trying to translate things like astrology or outer space into music. Think of their album Astro Sounds from Other Worlds.
Astro Sounds, okay.
They tried to go maybe too far, too fast. They received objections, particularly from more conservative regions in the US, and they actually had to scale back some of their more experimental formats. They were definitely pushing the boundary of what easy listening could be, sometimes a bit awkwardly.
But then you had the Mystic Moods Orchestra, and they perfected the microcosm approach, didn't they?
Oh, they were geniuses of contextual sound, absolute masters. They realized the music itself shouldn't necessarily be the centerpiece. It should function more as an authentic backdrop to natural sounds, thunderstorms, ocean waves, bird song, or even the ambiance of a train journey.
Right, the sound effects were up front.
Exactly. And their timing was just impeccable. It coincided perfectly with the rise of FM stereo radio in the mid-1960s.
Ah, stereo, that makes sense.
Yeah, this new technology allowed them to introduce these sense immersion effects that made the listening experience incredibly immersive and, three-dimensional for the listener at home.
And the response they got was apparently pretty intense. People felt this music provided something different, something unique.
Oh, they absolutely did. Listeners described it, and this is a direct quote from the source material, as the safest form of an artificially altered state.
Oh, wow. The safest high, basically.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
The Mystic Moods Orchestra mastered this cinematic approach, where the sound itself became a kind of special effect. They would use careful location recording, like capturing horses neighing at Southern California's Santa Susana Pass, which was apparently a former Chumash Indian gathering site.
Interesting detail.
Before the music would then transition seamlessly into some recognizable film theme or pop song. The whole experience was about atmosphere and controlled psychological effect, and it was discreetly marketed as this seductive flow of continuous and uninterrupted pleasure. They proved commercially that carefully engineered repetition and ambience could regulate, soothe, and even transport the mind.
Okay, so we've established that both the commercial world, with Muzak and mood music, and the burgeoning spiritual world were using repetition and sustained texture functionally. Then the mid-1970s show this really fascinating convergence, particularly in, let's call it, serious music, We see figures often referred to as the New York Hypnotic School, Lamonti Young, Terry Riley, Philip Glass, Steve Reich.
Minimalists.
Exactly. Producing this pulse pattern minimalism that critics sometimes, maybe dismissively, dubbed the higher disco.
Yeah, and that comparison, the higher disco, is actually profoundly revealing because it highlights the visceral effect that these repetitive structures have.
Visceral, meaning bodily.
Bodily, immediate, physiological. The high art minimalist drone and the relentless four-on-the-floor disco beat, they shared an effect on the listener that bypassed intellectual analysis and went straight for the nervous system.
And the critical analysis of this effect, it connects us to some pretty high-level psychoanalysis, particularly Lacanian thought. The idea is that this repetition somehow bypasses the symbolic order. Can you unpack that a bit, the underlying psychological tension there?
Certainly. So when music is structured around narrative, a clear start, middle, conclusion, thematic development, it engages our symbolic order, our capacity for memory, anticipation, representation, meaning-making.
Right, storytelling in music.
Exactly. Repetitive music, however, resists this kind of narrative routing. By sustaining a pulse or a drone, it tends to regress the listener, theoretically, to a pre-subjective space, a space before language and representation fully take hold. This is what Lacanian psychoanalysis terms the real.
The real, right.
It's the domain of pure, non-representational intensity, where our usual narrative expectations are kind of short-circuited. You're just in the sound.
So this repetition holds a kind of dual, almost conflicting charge then. It's both a drive toward dissolution, losing yourself, and also this powerful, totalizing force.
Precisely. That's the tension. On one hand, it embodies Thanatos, the Fortean death drive, or the drive toward the dissolution of the self. You got to lose your sense of individual identity, memory, and even chronological time within the endless loop.
You get lost in it.
You get lost in it. But on the other hand, it's also the purest expression of Eros, the life drive, a powerful, totalizing metastasis of processed desire.
Metastasis, like a spreading.
Like an overwhelming, spreading intensity. The relentless beat or pulse creates this consuming, passionate intensity, what some critics call the painful thrill of the media sublime, an abstract mental encompassing of a huge, unrepresentable force. And this tension, losing the self to gain an immediate, powerful, maybe even overwhelming experience, that's really the spiritual engine driving repetition.
And this idea of spiritual functionalism, it's mirrored explicitly in actual meditative practices, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The pulse pattern minimalism aligns directly with specific meditative goals. Think of the Suzuki method in violin instruction. Shinichi Suzuki, the renowned teacher, he viewed musical repetition explicitly as a pathway to gradual enlightenment.
Really? In violin lessons?
Yes, his tonalization exercises were these minimalist fragments designed to be repeated tens, even hundreds of thousands of times.
Wow, that takes some serious commitment.
It certainly does. Suzuki himself apparently once repeated a single long tone 100,000 times over 25 days back in 1957.
Good grief.
And this aligns with concepts like the Soto Zen practice of just sitting, or Shikantazu, where sustained practice and repetition, rather than, say, sudden insight via koan, is what leads to enlightenment. The functional message is crystal clear. Sustained sonic repetition is seen as a technology for structural change in consciousness.
That perfectly bridges the gap for us. We move from the philosophical potential of repetition in music and meditation to the direct, really hands-on therapeutic application of sound, specifically through vibrational healing, which requires us to accept a pretty fundamental principle, maybe best summarized by the poet Novalis. Every illness is a musical problem, the healing, a musical solution.
It's a beautiful summation. And if that holographic paradigm we discussed is correct, if everything fundamentally is frequency and vibration, then treating vibration with vibration becomes the most logical and, frankly, elegant healing modality available.
Right. It makes intuitive sense within that framework.
It does. And this introduces us to the whole realm of biofield healing. It's a practice centered around the human biofield, which is described in these sources as a complex, very weak electromagnetic field that utilizes electromagnetic bioinformation for the body's self-regulation.
Now, to accept the mechanism here, things like tuning forks and this idea of subtle energy, we do have to grapple with the fact that mainstream science, which is generally rooted in a more mechanistic worldview, often denies their existence, right?
We absolutely must acknowledge that.
Yeah.
These practices fundamentally rely on the concept of subtle energy. You hear terms like chi, ki, prana, ether, or simply life force. These are energies described and perceived across cultures for millennia.
Right. Ancient concepts.
Ancient concepts. And while they currently defy measurement by conventional scientific instruments, they are the absolute foundation of this type of healing. The tuning fork methodology, for example, is believed to act directly on this assumed subtle energy field.
I want to focus on the specific mechanism described because it's a really crucial detail in the sources. They mention the interaction with water domains in the body. How exactly does a tuning fork supposedly achieve a physical healing response through water?
Okay, so the physics, as presented in these sources, relies on the idea that sound travels extremely fast and very efficiently through the watery solids of the body. Our tissues are mostly water, right? So when a tuning fork is applied to the body or even just activated near the body, the resulting holographic sound field is thought to interact specifically with what are called coherent water domains in the tissues. This refers to membrane regions, often called watery exclusion zones, or EZ layers.
EZ layers, exclusion zones. What makes these EZ layers important in this context?
Well, research cited in the sources suggests that this highly structured water, these EZ layers, may act like a kind of liquid crystalline matrix. And this matrix might be capable of storing energy or information, essentially functioning like a biological battery or memory system.
Okay, so structured water holding information.
That's the idea. Sound, therefore, is proposed to interact with this structure, potentially disrupting static or stuck information, what the practitioners often call reawakening cellular memories, which then leads to a restorative healing response.
So the sound is physically shaking loose stored trauma or stuck information that is literally, according to this model, crystallized in the body's water structure.
That is the functional hypothesis, yes. And practitioners report that they can actually observe this interaction directly during a session.
How so?
They use the tuning forks almost like detectors, scanning the area around the body to find these pockets of stuck energy. When the fork approaches an area of high resistance in the field, and this might be, say, 2 feet away from the physical body, not even touching,
Wow.
its tone will suddenly flare up. It might become noticeably louder, sharper, or even dissonant compared to its baseline tone.
So the subtle energy field itself is literally signaling resistance to the harmonic tone of the fork.
Precisely. That's how they interpret it. And this resistance, importantly, is mapped to an incredibly detailed emotional cartography. It's a system that connects current energetic blockages to past psychological experiences. The subtle energy field, often organized into channels and chakras in these systems, is believed to hold the record of specific emotions, often localized in very specific areas of the body or the field around it.
Okay, can you walk us through maybe a couple of those specific cartographic examples? Show us how a fixed belief or an old emotion might manifest physically or energetically according to the system.
Sure, we could provide several examples from the sources. The practitioner's job is then to move this energy, to break up these patterns, these fixed beliefs that show up as resistance. For instance, chronic or undigested sadness, maybe related to past grief that hasn't been fully processed, is often found to collect just off the left shoulder area in the biofield.
The left shoulder, interesting.
The practitioner would then work with the tuning forks in that area to try and reintegrate this energy pocket, reducing the energetic resistance felt through the fork's tone, and potentially alleviating the pain or emotional weight associated with that unresolved sadness.
Okay, what about the right side of the body? Does that have different associations?
It often does. Issues on the right side, particularly around the right side of the heart chakra area or down towards the right hip, often relate to what's described as guilt-driven overdoing.
Guilt-driven overdoing, like being a people pleaser.
Exactly like that. It's the energy resulting from continually saying yes when you really mean no, or constantly prioritizing others' needs to the point of your own depletion. This pattern often manifests energetically as frustration or chronic tension in that right hip or shoulder area.
Right, carrying the weight of responsibility.
Precisely. So by applying the harmonic tone of the tuning fork, the practitioner aims to help the client break up and integrate this resistance, ultimately achieving a greater sense of inner harmonization. It's all about moving energy, connecting the psychological past to the energetic present, and fundamentally modulating the biofield for functional healing.
Okay, so if we try to synthesize these two really profound threads, on one hand, the kind of cynical commercial engineering of ambience with music, and on the other, this intentional spiritual engineering of subtle energy with tuning forks, we arrive at this core concept of the functional aesthetic. The repetition, whether it's muzak or a tuning fork drone, is primarily a tool, isn't it?
It absolutely is the ultimate tool for regulation, whether internal or external. And we can contrast that cynical view of functional music, designed primarily to control attention and manufacture desire in the marketplace, with the spiritual view of functional sound, which is designed to harmonize the inner self and facilitate gnosis, or direct knowing.
But they both rely on the same basic principle.
They both rely on sustained, low-involvement sonic texture. That's the common ground.
And this shared reliance, it brings us back nicely to Brian Eno, who famously defined ambient music in a way that, well, it perfectly describes the functional requirement of both these spiritual and commercial sound environments.
Yeah, Eno's definition is key here. He defined ambient music as music that must be able to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular.
Right.
It must be as ignorable as it is interesting. And crucially, his stated intent was for it to induce calm and a space to think.
That concept right there, creating internal space, the opportunity for reflection that aligns perfectly with the functional goal of the New Age seeker we talked about earlier. The slow, repetitive nature of this music, whether it's, commercial mood music or intentional ambient work by someone like Eno, it provides the necessary sound space, what one source calls the acoustic corridor.
Acoustic corridor, I like that.
Yeah, it's the space necessary for the New Age emphasis on personal experience as the sole basis of religious truth, which is essentially gnosis.
Exactly. Repetitive sound facilitates that kind of low-involvement experience, that relaxing into the sound world, as you might say. And this inner exploration is the purpose. It's the technology that allows the individual to achieve those altered states, ASCs, to potentially access those other realities the sources mentioned, to communicate spiritually, or just to feel a deep blending with universal consciousness.
So the sound texture itself becomes the vehicle.
The sustained sonic texture, yeah. Whether it's Vivaldi on repeat in an old Muzak track or a completely abstract drone from a modern ambient artist, it becomes the means by which the individual aims to become that spiritually empowered, whole, hale organism they set out to be way back when, under this banner of functionalism.
So what does this all mean for us today? For you, the listener, trying to navigate a world just saturated with sound, engineered or otherwise. Our sources seem to demonstrate pretty clearly that the utility of sound is undeniable, whether it's being used to manipulate the fatigue cycle in an office,
right,
or potentially resolve deeply rooted emotional trauma via harmonic vibration in a therapy session.
The final synthesis really is this. What was historically dismissed, often quite snobbishly, as coffee-colored classical music or just bland elevator filler was never just noise. It was, even in its most cynical commercial form, an early system of biofield and mood modulation.
Even Muzak was modulating the biofield in a way.
In its own functional way, yes. It served a culture, and you could argue the broader American culture especially, that was, and arguably remains, intensely obsessed with spiritual and psychological functionalism, with the systematic, often repetitive creation of inner harmony and outer productivity. The repetitive loop, therefore, isn't necessarily a regression to dullness, but rather can be seen as a technologically mediated opening to an inner world of possibility. #outro.
Wow. That was a tremendous and incredibly detailed deep dive. We really traced the path of functional sound all the way from the esoteric origins of the New Age movement with people like Alice Bailey. We tracked its commercial exploitation through the engineered mood music of Muzak and the really immersive aesthetics of groups like the Mystic Moods Orchestra.
Yeah, the safest altered state.
Exactly. And we landed firmly in the realm of subtle energy, the biofield, and this sophisticated idea of self-healing using sound and vibration, like with the tuning forks.
And the central finding, I think, remains that the true fusion of this entire sonic genre, whether you call it ambient, easy listening, minimalist, or healing frequencies, is its incredible adaptability and its utility.
Right.
It successfully serves both arguably cynical commercial ends aimed at control and profound spiritual ends aimed at gnosis, direct experience. And it does this all through the elegant mechanism of sustained, repetitive sonic texture. It's just a powerful testament to how frequency and sound can shape both our external perception and our internal physiology.
Yeah, which raises, I think, a really important final question for you, our listener, to consider as you go about your day. The spiritual seeker looking for enlightenment and the office worker just trying to get through the afternoon slump, both listening to some form of ambient sound, were kind of united, weren't they? United in their quest for homeostatic mood regulation.
A search for balance.
So if music is indeed a tool for self-realization, or even just self-regulation, What non-musical repetitive cultural practices in your own life, think about your daily commute, maybe your habit of scrolling through digital feeds, or even just the relentless structure of your work routine, what repetitive loops are actually shaping your consciousness, maybe creating resistance in your biofield without you even realizing it?
That's a deep question.
It is. Think about the repetition in your life and maybe ask yourself, what reality is it trying to create?